Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Perception Action Journal Club. We decided to hit record because we were talking about this and we were saying lots of good things. We didn't want to waste them. So we decided on the fly to just cover chapter 5 today because we started reading and realized, whoo, there's a lot in there. Not because we were just being lazy, but there's a lot to talk about. Instead of doing 5, we'll do 6 next time. Yeah, chapter 5 is the ambient optic array, which has builds a lot of things after this.
Yeah.
It
really does build. That's the thing I'm
yeah.
really enjoying about this after Turvey, where it was just lots of one-shot
Mhm.
thing. Like Gibson's building it step by
Yeah.
step. Here's the environment to be perceived. Here's the elements in it. Here's surfaces. Here's the things. Then he talks about stimulus and information versus stimulation, and just sets you up for the idea that you're allowed more than just photons of light on the hitting receptors. And like by the time you get to chapter 5, you're like you're kind of obviously I'm reading along going but like I'm also Gibson has made it so that I couldn't possibly read the first 4 chapters and do anything other than
That's his approach. His approach is to you, and they're like,
great.
Read with the direct theory of direct perception. I didn't realize it.
That's his approach. It's a little bit of a masterclass in writing, actually.
Yeah,
it's
sneaky, very,
but not in a weird way. Yeah, not in an evil way.
So let's start with that. So let's start with the term, the ambient optic array. So optic, obviously, we're talking about vision here, right? Although the same principles apply to audition and haptics.
Yes.
But we're talking about ambient is important. It means it surrounds you, right?
Completely.
An array is going to be important, means it's structured in some way. We're not talking about being surrounded by constant light, right? Gibson says that's not what we experience. We don't experience the same illumination everywhere. Well, we do in fog or something, but normally light is different in different parts. I think an essential point of this point is Gibson make is that this thing, ambient optic array, exists whether there's an observer or not, right?
Yes.
So people were describing this before they knew anything about the eye, the lens, right? They're talking about.
That was interesting, wasn't it? Because before there was knowledge of the eye and photons, it felt like there was more. I can't remember who it was. Was it Ptolemy? There was a better understanding almost of this.
Yes.
Part where it starts from than there is now. It almost
Remember that Gibson explicitly set this up in the introduction, right? He said the first thing is to talk about the environment to be perceived. Then we're going to talk about the information for that perception. Then we're going to talk about some experiments about that. And then we're going to talk about the weird case of depiction and images. And you have to do it in this order because this is the order in which things actually happen. And so we haven't got to the point yet where the eye is necessarily involved, but we're still talking about where perception begins. This chapter describes what it means,
what there is to be perceived.
But like one of the slogans is that vision doesn't begin at the retina; it begins in the environment.
Yeah,
this is what that means. This is how it's possible for vision to begin in the environment.
Yeah, you can talk about information without referring to the eye or the brain or observer or anything. It's out there. If there happens to be an observer at the middle of the optic array, fine. But it still was there before him. Yeah, sorry, man.
No, Rob, you mentioned about sort of like it's structured light, and I think there's a really key thing when he talks about unstructured light. It just means that there's no difference. It's uniform, isn't it? Yeah. Uniformity is unstructured, because normally when I think about unstructured, I think that's a bit more chaotic, but it's the opposite way around.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Would be maybe a bit more chaotic and different. It's because it's light that's reflecting off things. So I had to do a little. That's the only reason why I'm bringing that. I had to go, no, structured light is what I would consider.
Yes.
It's not uniform.
Like going every which way.
Uniform. It's the other around.
That's a good point. Where the example I always give students is talk about whiteout conditions, right? And so whiteout conditions, when it's snowing, for example, there's plenty of light, but there's no structure to that light. And whiteout conditions are a disaster for visual perception.
Yeah.
Right. Tons of light, no structure, no optical ray, and what happens? You drive off the road, you go off the cliff, you crash, you die, and all goes totally wrong, right?
No perception, really. Right? Yeah.
A disaster for perception, right?
Yeah. So no, sorry, I just thought I'd bring that up because
that's an important point. Yeah, for sure. When the structured array essentially is more chaotic in a sense because it's light everywhere, reflecting off everything, bouncing off everything, right? But it is structured in a sense. It's orderly that's what Gibson is for.
But again,
random, right?
Let's just note that he is immediately giving himself access to something that no other theory has ever given itself access to, namely regularity in what the sense organs are interacting with, right? And this is the central move, right? Affordances are interesting, but they're not the central move. The central move is information. And like just noting that you're surrounded by a pre-structured array of light, that there is structure in that, there's these particular kinds of relation, and we'll talk about the particular kinds of structure because it's not just any old structure, but like this is it. This is the thing that gets you the ability to have a direct theory of perception that sidesteps all of the fatal flaws of indirect theories of perception. And it took us thousands of years to get here. I don't think anyone else has ever done this, as far as I know. Gibson is the first person to think that this might be an option. Yeah,
it's like the truth is out there. You just need to detect it, right? We don't. It's everything. Yeah, you're right. I agree. Affordance is a nice what most people associate with him, but the concept of specifying and well, obviously invariance and invariance are a huge part of the chapter.
And that's a huge bit of this chapter, isn't it?
But and he talks about the concept of angles, visual angles, right? Which always said we don't have access to 3D shape. We can't perceive 3D shapes directly. We don't perceive distances. We perceive everything in the world in terms of angles.
Yes.
Right? Angles that the light is coming from, angles that light tends on the object from the same surface. Right? That's what we have to,
And that's going to be really important. Gibson doesn't actually talk about it at this point, but one of the things that, given that that's the nature of the optic array, there is a final piece of the puzzle that we haven't got anywhere near yet. And I actually don't know if Gibson gets into it, and that's calibration.
No.
Calibration is taking those angles which are effectively unitless measurements. Well, I mean, there's degrees and things, but it's all relational and the units cancel out. You then have to put that measurement onto a scale. And of course, the scale is effectivities, is your ability to interact with things. Action is the scale. But this is why calibration is required. But actually, it's also nice that calibration is required. Like, the more I think about it, like it's kind of lucky that it works this way. It's lucky that visual information is all angles, because that gets you to solid visual angles, which you can then use to get huge amounts of stuff, and it also gets you optic flow. But it's really important that it doesn't come with an intrinsic metric, because you need to impose the metric on it, so that you can close the loop. Like, it couldn't actually work any other way. Sorry, that just occurred to me now.
No, that's very important. Yeah, like you can measure it. You're right. You can degrees, but degrees is meaningless to us, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
What does 10 degrees mean? It reminds me of like when they measure the steepness of a hill, when they talk about the steepness of a hill in cycling or something.
Yeah.
45 degrees. Well, what is that? I don't even know. Show me a 45 degree. That's meaningless, right?
That 45-degree angle currently means it's 70% of my capacity to bike up the damn hill, or 90% or 130% of my capacity, depending on how tired I am, right? That's interesting. I'm gonna have to think.
But then he gets angles. Then he goes into, we talked about this, but so a big key point is that he's going to get to is that point of observation moves, right? That's essential, obviously, for Gibson. We're always moving, right? Even when we're not moving, it moves a little. We get right. But he talks first about from this optic array, from these angles, we had laws of perspective.
Yes.
With, paint. And that's another thing. I was reading the biography of Leonardo da Vinci. So another thing that connects. But basically, he feels this is not quite the same because it's a stationary observer, right?
Yeah.
You're not talking about any movement, and we're talking about painting a small picture, not a fully array around the observer. But he points out that people derived the laws of perspective, how angles change in the distance, with different, before we knew anything about an eye or anything. Again, that you don't need an observer to have laws of perspective.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah, that's really important, is the fact that, again, right, vision, or perception, but vision in particular, begins in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things that observers, right, so locomotion is going to do something quite important.
Mm-hmm.
Namely, locomotion is going to create flow / variation, which is going to reveal the invariance. And the variation are flip sides of the same coin, and they sort of mutually define one another, and they separate out in that way. But there's still a ton of the work has been done already by the ways in which light reflects off surfaces and environments, right, to make sure there's vocabulary.
Like the same object moved further away is going to project a smaller angle, right? It's going to cover all those kind of things, laws of perspective.
Yeah.
But that's a special case of a stationary observer.
Yeah.
Right. Gibson says observation implies movement. That is locomotion with reference to
yeah. And for me, that was the key bit, isn't it? He almost says all other theories of vision have just focused on a stationary. It hasn't come to the point of the observer is moving, and when the observer moves, that changes an awful lot of the relationships, especially the relationships around perspective. And he goes into an awful lot. I mean, I'm just trying to look at some of it. Initially, those visual angles.
Yeah, again, where I think he flipped the script was here is before him. Motion was assumed to be a problem we had to solve vision, right?
Yes.
Like correspond. What matches with what I saw before? It creates a whole bunch of quote unquote problems that your vision system must solve. Gibson's like, no, it actually creates a ton of good information about the environment.
Because motion, as you were saying, is the natural state of the organism, right? Like the organism that isn't moving is dead or asleep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so vision and, like you say, the saccades and jumping and stuff like that has always been considered a major problem to solve, rather than starting from the fact that a moving organism in an environment actually is picking up very different information.
Yes. Yeah. You should say what you were saying earlier before we started, actually, Marianne, about what Gibson's done in this chapter, right? What has he done?
He started from the point of the fact that it's moving. That's the key. The organism is moving. And that's never been the start point of vision before.
Isn't that wild?
It's wild, and it switches everything so much, doesn't it?
Like, I think he literally says at one point that the moving point of observation is the base case, is the general case. It's not the special case. Special weird case is the frozen point of observation. And Ian, it's so obvious when you think about it.
He implies learning and calibrate. Well, I think he implies learning and calibration through there, because he implies that an organism moving in an environment and those leading, occluding, and what's the opposite of occluding, and those edges are what allows you to perceive things and know that they haven't just vanished out of sight. So that information is still there, but it's because the organism has the experience of moving in the environment, which goes back to work.
And move itself.
And moving itself, But it did make me think about when you talk about the convex slopes, and from just my time of working in the mountains, people who are not used to being in mountains are very poor at reading convex slopes. They get themselves into all sorts of trouble because they just can't read the environment. They don't notice the big drop-offs off the back of convex slope, for example. So there's always, so he does imply it, this calibration, because that calibration is part of learning to perceive this information, because this information is perceived through moving. And he does talk about you can step back and undo, almost like rewind.
Yes. But he doesn't quite have calibration yet. He's not talking about particular organisms moving. He's talking about the motion of an organism.
The motion of an organism, yeah. But what I mean, there's bits in there, so I kind of read that.
Calibration is the thing you do by scaling to your own particular and experiences. But
But I think there's an implication that we learn to pick up that information because all organisms learn to pick up and understand the meaning of these things like occluding edges and stuff like that because of the experience of moving.
We're going to go back to the stuff we talked about in the last chapter. They're going to specify meaningful things to the animal, right?
Yeah.
Whether you're foraging, whether you're hunting.
And being able to pick up invariance.
That's kind of where I was going to go. He talks about when the observer moves, point of observation moves.
Yeah.
We get change, things that change, in variance, right? And things that don't change. Invariance. And this is a classical perception action. It's meant to be, it's a duality, right? You cannot they create each other. They appear together, right? They're not, you can't talk of one without the other, really.
Yeah, and really importantly, a duality and not a dualism.
Yes.
It's not separating those things out. Mm-hmm. It's the fact that they are literally two sides of the same coin and that they are mutually defining.
Yeah. So when we look at a surface like a table or something, as we walk closer, as we move towards it, the angle gets bigger.
Mm-hmm.
As we go around it, its shape will change. Eventually, it will look like a line if we look at it at right angle. Yeah. So we get all those are the variants, the changes in the optical information, the array as we move.
Yeah.
Then there's invariance. I think is a difficult because invariance are things that don't change, but they're not. I think that's a little bit misleading. The relationships that the better to say the relationships that don't change.
Don't change.
Yes.
Rather than
because
they still change.
Things the relationships that can change. They can't change.
Yeah. So I think that people misunderstand that, right? A little bit.
So let me introduce. I've used this as well to try and explain this to students, right? Mm-hmm. So Pythagoras' theorem is an example of a higher order invariant over transformation. So if you start out with a right-angled triangle that's really close, and then you move it away and it's now a different size, if you measure the individual sides, then the individual sides have changed length, right? So there's lots of variation going on. And but the thing that makes it a right-angled triangle is the fact that Pythagoras' theorem, the relationship between the different sides, remains the same regardless of the exact value of the lengths of the sides. And so obviously right-angledness is actually not something that necessarily we perceive, but if you could build a detector that detected the relationship identified by Pythagoras' theorem, if you could build a detector that picked that relationship up, you would have built a detector that picked up something that remained invariant over all transformations.
Yeah.
As long as the thing continued to be a right-angled triangle. This is the thing, the invariants in the optic array are invariant because of the stability of the surface. Which is, again, remember, we're trying to figure out how organisms get to perceive environments. And so that deep lawful connection between the form of the thing in the environment and the form of the thing in the optic array is critical, and it's deep. But so the Pythagoras' theorem is an example I try to use. It's a mathematical description of a relationship that remains invariant over transformations, up to but not including the thing not being a right-angled triangle anymore. at which
Yeah.
point something else has happened. Right?
I think that's a good example. Yeah. So there's key things. One, the relationship is what is remaining invariant. The individual pieces are still changing.
Which are the sizes, that angle and that side and that side and hypotenuse.
They're still changing, but the relationship between the two is followed by, right? So that's one. The invariants are talking about relationships. That's the first.
Yes.
And two, it doesn't get into, they're going to be higher order,
Yes.
which means they're not simple. Simple visual angle is related to distance, right?
And they have to be higher order because higher order things are the only things that have enough room to maneuver to remain invariant over the transformation, because the lower order things vary. So in the Pythagoras' theorem, right, the sum of the hypotenuse, the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides. So it's squares, so it's x squared plus y squared equals the hypotenuse squared. So that's the higher order, right? The individual pieces, x and y and the hypotenuse, those numbers vary, but the relationship between the higher order versions of themselves, and it's really important, and that's the only place invariance can be revealed. All other theories of perception have gone, oh well, I'm looking at these lower order, single order things. Sensations, lines, that sort of stuff. And look at them; they're all over the damn place. They're ambiguous. They're a mess. They're horrible. Therefore, but they're the base case because they're the simplest thing, and therefore we have to somehow deal with it. Gibson simply allowed himself. No, what if you could just pick up the higher order thing where the invariance is allowed to live? Wouldn't that be neat?
Yeah. And I say that's essentially direct perception, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. The general view before was that problem with perception was it's ambiguous, right? Because so for example, as I said, when we walk around the table, it's retina, it's visual angle, its projection on our eye changes shape. So how do we know that we walked around, we're viewing it from a different angle, or it's actually changed, it's a different object, right?
Yeah.
How do we know that's a problem? So we're starting.
I mean, what's a rectangle, let alone anything else? Right?
Yeah.
It's only ever a rectangle if you're above it.
Yeah, bird's eye view. Yeah. So
which you never have.
How do we know?
I personally do not hover over my desk.
No.
You don't dance on the tables.
Yeah. How do we know it's still the same object? Yeah. How do we know that like when something expands, gets bigger, that it's not or is it a balloon or a ball coming at her head? Right. That's a pretty important distinction.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Is it going like this? Or is it going like that?
Yeah. Gibson says if you look hard enough, there's actually relationships in the environment that tell you those things, right?
Yeah.
So the balloon and the ball example, if you look at both the change in size and the change in the angle relative to the horizon, that relationship is preserved for an object that's bending. There's again, it's a relationship.
The other thing that's just occurred to me is that he gets to this point in the book, allowing himself these higher order invariant features, because he starts with the description of surfaces in the environment rather than lines or planes in an abstract space. So he starts with the reality of the surface in the environment. And as soon as you've got that gives you solid angles, right? And as soon as you've got solid angles, you've got the room for higher order relationships. So one of the reasons why no one else got here is that no one else started where he did, which is chapter 1 through 3, what the environment to be perceived. Every other book, as he identifies, begins with all the psychological processes involved to perceive these things in order to get to the environment. It's funny, isn't it? It's just such a simple flip of perspective of like, well, okay, a perceptual system probably evolved to work with what it's got available to it. I wonder what's available to it, as opposed to beginning with this more mathematical approach.
So it's kind of this is a key point because everyone's on about invariance now. Invariant is a relationship that remains true over transformation.
Yes, and is revealed.
revealed.
It's revealed through the transformation by virtue of the fact that it stays the same while everything around it is changing. And that becomes important for learning.
Yes, becomes important for learning.
Yeah, what can you? It takes time to learn things, so you can only learn things that hang around for long enough. And the only things that hang around for long enough are the things that remain stable over time, because everything else is changing. And that's why perceptual learning is differentiation and not enrichment. That's
And he talking about along because what does he call them? Locomotion paths, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Which is at the table. We're locomoting around the table, so we know it's still the same table. It hasn't, our movement and what we're doing is part of that perceptual relationship.
Yeah. It gets to the thing, a couple things that maybe we'll get to later. One is these relationships, this information is expressed in these relationships is perceived directly. It's almost like Runson's smart. We don't get to them by doing the mathematical process of perceiving one part of it and the other and dividing them.
Yes.
Right? That's a subtle point, but
so actually the smart perceptual device sits on top of Gibson's approach. It says, it's okay, you're allowed to build a detector that's sensitive to higher order variables. It's a perfectly plausible thing to do. You don't have to build a device that picks up that one and then that one and then that one and then does the maths. You can just pick up the relation directly. That's that was an important additional step that Gibson doesn't actually have in here. He says the invariants are available, but he doesn't quite identify how you get to them.
I think it's important because so if you perceive area, you don't perceive area by calculating length, perceiving width and multiplying, because that sounds a lot like computation, which is the information processing. We don't do that in our head to get to area. That's the idea.
Yes, he talks about them as two different things: perspective structure and invariant structure, doesn't he? And the invariant structure we're perceiving as those relationships. And I think that's where he talks about this. The more it changes, the more it stays the same. It's that idea of through transformations, you keep the same relationships. But I read that my understanding was that it is the specifying information. It almost like it has to be. That's the bit that we use. It needs to stay there, otherwise we can't go back and use it again, can we? And we can only use something that has got a lawful relationship with that remains stable over millennia, because we've evolved to perceive it. It's not even just our lifetime that it needs to remain stable over.
That's certainly part of it. So a given surface, the way it interacts with light is a fact of ecological optics. It is a law, in fact, of ecological optics. And specification relies on a lawful basis. If you don't have a law sitting at the bottom of it, then
you would have to do all
have specification. Other people have tried to tell a story where you can get specification without a law. I'm deeply suspicious of those attempts. I don't think it works.
Because that's where you would have to have some kind of internal additional information.
Yeah, a little bit, right? But the other thing, of course, is that invariant structure is information about the persisting layout of the environment. But perspective structure, even though it is changing, is also information, but it's information about, what is it information about? Your motion through.
I was just going to say that this invariant information, actually, my understanding was that he's really clear that we pick this up when we are locomoting or when something's moving. It's not necessarily there in a static image. That's
right. Well, because we're not even static images and depiction of surfaces and things. We're going to get to it at the end. Why? Because it's the weird case.
The weird case, yeah.
It's a deeply weird case. Like, it's very strange. The fact that we can perceive pictures is actually a little bit wild. But you're right, because the thing is that this relationship, this perspective structure and invariant structure, this duality, isn't present in an image.
John, I said that earlier, John. I don't know if you joined us. I did mention Eleanor. I still don't think she gets enough credit, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the learning aspect is important, and it's certainly not. Learning doesn't feature centrally in here, or at least not yet.
No, but I think it's implied just by the fact that if you're, he talks about moving and then moving back again and locomoting in an environment, and that's how you become attuned to this information. So there's an implication of learning there. For me, anyway, I read that.
Yeah.
If an organism hadn't been moving around, they wouldn't pick up.
Yeah. I think it's also so as you
wouldn't know what was a variant.
Yeah.
Still, yeah. Sorry,
the point about as you observer moves, the point about distribution moves, you create flow. See, I think he chooses that word purposely and carefully. Wait, he's trying to move away from the idea that we're getting static snaps. We're not getting one static snapshot at one point in time, another one, and comparing them. Right. That's not.
He also solves that problem of.
And also, he said they're not really talked about here. There's a lot more transformations that are like not just change in size. There's some very complicated transformations that occur that are informative.
I had to get my out for some of it. Yeah, he talks about
this James Cutting wrote this is Perception with the Eye. James Cutting. There's a whole book, Perception with the Eye for Motion, James Cutting.
Nice.
It's all about the information from flow, right? So it's full. It's basically this part of the chapter in a whole book because show how you can get basically everything you ever wanted to know about how you're moving, your environment. And also, there's a point you make. There's kind of a circular causality here, right? The flow you get both specifies how you're moving through the environment and the structure of the environment at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. So you don't need to know the layout of the environment to beforehand to plan your movement and guide. But that's it. Okay.
Yeah, that was wasn't it? Yeah.
So as you move through the environment, there's this flow created that has these invariant features, which, as Andrew said, are laws of the environment. How the environment that's what structures means by structures of the environment.
There was one bit I highlighted there as well, and he talks about the fact that all observers can perceive the same environment depends on the fact that each point of view can move to any other. Again, we see it because we can move around and see the different perspective. There's different points of view. Oh, reduplication. That was the thing that I was like, I haven't heard that word before. Yeah. I jumped too far ahead.
Then he gets into kind of object like occlusion and kind of object permanence questions, right? So and the object can.
So if it melted or set on fire,
included. Yeah.
So the occlusion section there's quite a nice break there. So he set up the basic features of the ambient optic array, and then the occlusion case is kind of at the time this book was written, it was the most well worked out example of structure in the ambient optic array that specified something for which there was empirical evidence that people were perceiving what the information specified and not what simply the stimulations identified, right?
Yeah.
So there's a nice break there, like that there's kind of that first third of the chapter then is just setting up, here's the basics, right? You've got these nested hierarchy, indefinitely dense nested hierarchy of visual solid angles projected from surfaces to a potential point of observation that an observer can then come to fill and then locomote through to the next one, to the next one, to the next one in this continuous fashion, not a series of discrete and that gives you invariant structure and perspective structure. It gives you invariance and flow. Flow's about locomotion, invariance is about the stable layout of the environment. And now you're off to the races, right? You've got all the pieces you need to start talking about how you identify particular things in the environment. And the occlusion case it's a great one. The occlusion one is fantastic.
Yeah. Can I just wind back a little bit there, actually? Because one of the just checking my understanding, and I was thinking again about when he wrote it and what was around and what people knew what they were talking about. And when he was talking about some of these, he talks about nested edges, doesn't he, in the in information. And in my head I was thinking, would he used the word fractal because it didn't exist then, did it? He was talking about canyons and mountains and hills and rocks, and that's a fractal pattern. Is that what he's getting at, that we're picking up?
As I understand it, fractal geometry is one of the possible ways you can go about nesting things.
It could be, some of them could be fractal and some of them wouldn't be.
There are non-fractal geometries that allow you to do nesting of things. It turns out that when you go look at the natural world, that fractal geometry seems to be a more appropriate way of describing what's actually going on in the natural world. And so, yeah, absolutely.
And leaf roots and things, but he wouldn't, that word fractal, I don't think had been coined at that time, was it? So I'm thinking in my head, would he, that's what I'm imagining, and that's what I'm thinking he might have.
I think Randy's right. It's a subset of by nested.
Fractals one of the ways.
Human made, example of nested, like the texture on an object. So the whole object, like a side of a building has an angle for the whole object. And every brick has a solid angle, right?
Yeah.
All
the bits and the brick. And those aren't going to be fractal.
No.
Because they're but
some would.
Some natural things will be.
Yeah. So that's it. I think fractal is, I think Rob's right. Fractal geometry is a way of describing some of the nesting that structures the optic array, but not, I don't think the whole thing has to be fractal.
No, I don't think
no. I'm just saying some of it would, and that helped me.
The natural world is more fractal than, Because that's the other thing, right? He keeps talking about the fact that it's sort of indefinitely dense, right? Basically, like Rob was saying, if you stand back and look at the building, you see the building. But if you continue to move towards it, then more and more of the structure continues to be revealed, and there's kind of no end to it, right?
Yeah.
You could ram your eye right up next to a brick, you'd still be getting
the brick.
So even though that nesting isn't necessarily fractal, it is indefinitely dense, right? Up to the resolution of the eye, and that's crazy, right? Like that means that, like, no matter where you look, there's invariant and perspective structure to be found.
Yes,
that's one. Like how that's, and of course it has to be, because that's how you see stuff, right?
And then the shapes of those edges, whether they're occluding or not, tells you a lot of information, because he did talk a lot about right angles and curves, convex shapes, didn't he? That we get information about so much. We get so much information about the environment that is not just, like you say, a 3D perspective from drawing, because of the way those edges behave as we locomote. I missed anything. Sit really close to it.
Interesting point he makes when he starts talking about occlusion, and the idea of reversibility.
Yeah, let's talk about
I thought particularly this is for, if you think about how people explore their environment in sports, right? When you're scanning your environment in soccer, football, you go back, forth, right? You're creating a transformation, making it reverse, creating, right? Essentially, boxing, martial arts, you're going forward, back, right? You're essentially, I don't know that so you're getting more and more information by essentially reversing the transformations you're creating.
Horses, I don't know about other animals with their eyes set on either side that have almost 360, they'll look at something with one eye and be happy and look at the other one and be, like have a different response. But they lift and lower their head and then change the eye. They actually deliberately look at a completely different eye, which is really interesting, because of course they've got a different field of vision to us. So it's interesting in a way. When I was thinking about that reversibility, I was thinking there's a sidedness as well in prey animals, or in horses anyway.
There's some insects that before they like strike or jump, they do this. Right?
Yeah.
The spider. The Porsche spider that Louise Barrett talks about in her book. Like, so the question is, does it memorize the route? No, it moves before it makes its jumps. It doesn't memorize the route. It moves in a particular way.
It's the one that can go and meet round corners, isn't it? Yeah.
So this is
it's phenomenal. But it's if you look at the spider and just look at the behavior in terms of it can follow this route that was previously occluded. You must have a memory of the route. But that's a really coarse description. But if you look more closely at what the spider actually does before it does a damn thing, it does this. And it's not just doing this for fun.
No, it's
doing what it's doing.
It's
the other half of the loop, right? It's acting to perceive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's deliberately giving
You're
yourself more. Yeah.
locomoting so as to generate flow that reveals the invariance. Yeah.
Yeah.
So occlusion is my favorite case of this. It's a fabulous.
So Gibson did a lot of research on
occlusions.
basic research on occlusion, right?
Yeah.
Occlusion obviously is when we're talking about the case where one object block, like the Andrew's showing, like an object is blocking
by the
the reflection of the light to your eye because of the position. You know, we call these interposition in static. We call it, it's a depth Q of interposition, right?
Yeah.
You know, we assume that the object that's blocking is in front of the object. Obviously.
Yeah. So if you just took a photo of me like this, that's different from observing me going in and out of view. And of course, Gibson's point is, remember, the mobile organ, the mobile point of observation is the base case.
Yeah.
So it's the mobile point of observation.
I meant to send it to you, actually. I managed to get a video. So one of Snoopy's favorite games, generally when I'm in a hurry, is there's a great big long wooden fence that goes around the sort of that housing next to me with a little gap underneath. And some of the gaps are a bit slopey. And he knows exactly where they are, and he'll go up to them and he'll put his tennis ball on. And if it doesn't roll underneath the fence, he'll give it a little nudge with his nose and it rolls underneath. And then he can do one or two things. I'll say my neighbor who watched him when my knee was injured, she went all the way around, and it's a long, long way. So about 100 meters to the end, walked around the fence, came back. And as she got there, he stuck his nose underneath and pulled the ball back.
He's teasing me.
But I say to him way round, which he knows, because that's that's one of the commands he learned, or the things he learned. You know, I used to teach the search dogs way round. So he knows he's got to go around something. I point to it. So he'll go whizzing up. He'll go round the fence without any problem at all and find the ball. Now, he can't see it from the moment he lets go. The only way he can see it is if he deliberately actually sticks his nose underneath and tries to pick it back up again. So at no other point can he see that ball. And yet he can do all these things with it. He can pinch it back while somebody else is going there because he's a collie and he thinks that's funny. Or he can go all the way around and get it. And also, when he goes around and gets it, depending on which way we're going, when I call him, he'll come the other way, back out a bit, to meet me in front rather than behind. And he knows exactly where the ball is, even if it sometimes there's a car there and it's rolled underneath. I go and peek over the top. He has no problems locating his ball, ever.
Yeah.
So I've got a bit of video for him. Sorry, I digress. But I just thought it was interesting because he's doing this. He's a collie playing games with, things going out of view and coming back, and in a very playful way.
Yeah. It's funny. Exploiting. Yeah. So
I have told my neighbor that if she says way round, he'll go get it himself.
My dog kind of does that with her. If you wait too long to throw the ball for him, he'll start throwing it for himself. Okay. So occlusion. So he talks about two types of occlusion. The fact that objects occlude themselves, like you can't see the back of my coffee cup because the front is blocking it from you.
Yes.
Right? It's occluding itself because it's a three-dimensional object. And
he talks about near and far sides very deliberately, doesn't he? Or near and off, which again used rather than front and back. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, Rob.
No.
It's an important distinction, actually. But the other thing he talks about is objects can occlude themselves.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can include something else.
Yes.
And those are revealed in two different ways.
Yeah.
Yes.
So something that is occluding itself, the occluded part is revealed through flow, perspective change.
Yeah.
When something occludes something else, that's revealed through this massive discontinuity in the optic flow.
Yes.
And so they're both revealed in flow, but they're revealed differently, which means that you've now got an informational difference between a coffee mug that you simply can't see the back of versus something that is in the way in between you and the coffee mug. You can now tell the difference about how things are. You've got some information about how things are arranged in space in the environment, right?
Yeah. John's got a really good point. comments there.
One of the examples of reversibility, right?
Yes.
When an object's being occluded, you can reverse it.
Yeah.
It's still there, right? If an object actually disappeared from existence, you couldn't reverse it. Right? It would be gone.
And the examples he gave of things burning and melting and things, didn't he?
Yeah.
Simple examples.
But he also talks, like, what he did a lot of research, like an occluding object has both a leading edge and a trailing edge.
Yeah.
It both occludes, deletes part of a view of Andrew, and reveals part of on the trailing edge. Another part comes, and those are incredibly important information.
Well, yeah, and the relationship between what's being occluded, what's being deleted, and what's accreting, the relationship between that, if that structure is related to itself, that's information for the continuity of the surface underneath it, right? But yeah, like in the fun, yeah. So there's an important point lurking in here that's really nice to see. That's really important to make, I think. What's happening in terms of the optical texture, the optical structure coming from my face, is that it is being deleted from the optic array as I am being occluded. So the optical texture is literally going out of existence. But it's happening in such a way that progressive occlusion and reaccretion, that particular higher order relationship specifies not a surface going out of existence, but a surface going out of view. Now, the optical texture is deleted, but if it's deleted in that particular way, then what you perceive is occlusion and not the object disappearing. And so this is a really solid example of the distinction between stimulation and stimulus information. The stimulation is going away. The stimulus information is specifying occlusion, and you perceive occlusion.
Yeah. So yeah, in terms of what he's trying to accomplish, I think he's giving a specific example of an invariant.
Yeah.
In a fairly simple case, like a kind of a dumb case. How would it decide between, if I was an animal, how would I know whether object disappeared, evaporated, or whether it's hiding behind a tree or something,
Yeah.
So he's obviously going to get to more, but there's basically he's illustrating
but it is quite important.
Yeah, for
let's
sure.
face it, babies have to learn this.
Yeah.
Right? Peekaboo initially freaks them the hell out, right?
Understanding how babies learn this. Right?
Or playing hide and seek, where they just put their eyes out of the way and they have their legs hanging out.
Like, oh my God, it's all gone.
They get upset. They think you left.
So you have to learn what the information is.
Yeah. Which wraps back to what I was saying at the beginning, that implied in the fact that you can't perceive unless you're moving. Obviously, when you're moving, you're learning as well. And if you're moving a lot, then that's when you start picking up the invariance. Yeah. And of course, that's going to be, which I think that links really nicely to Eleanor's work and others. Really neatly there.
Get to learning to detect the information, right? Although this information is out there,
they're learning to detect the higher the specifying information in their environment, aren't they? And then calibrate their action capabilities to that.
Yeah, which is was kind of a problem originally with the ecological psychology. Like, the information is out there, but we don't just immediately detect it.
Yeah,
we have to learn. There's learning, which is education of attention.
I don't know if either of you have ever watched, again, a young prey animal. So, I watched River being born and a number of other horses, and they're fascinating. They're absolutely fascinating, because within a couple of hours they're up, and the first thing they do is they start cantering around the mom and speed. They look like they're a dog with zoomies. They're doing zoomies, changing speed, angles, and they just do that constantly. And so obviously they are far more precocious when they're born than a human baby is. I mean, like any other, but like when I look back afterwards, it's just like, that's just calibration. They're just constant calibration, a little drink and then calibrate. so that very quickly they can run if they have to next to their mom. But doing flying lead changes and cantering loops and accelerating.
But what are they doing? They're locomoting. They're doing the thing required to generate access to variance and perspective.
They're creating information.
And
that they might need fairly early on.
Yeah, so. And human infants just happen to suck at it for other reasons, right? But there's a great developmental paper called "Travel Broadens the Mind," and it's basically a review of the fact of what happens when babies start to be able to locomote themselves, and that's when things start to ratchet up exponentially, right?
Every parent knows that, right? Your whole world changes as soon as they can.
And of course, there's different modes of locomotion, but as soon as you've got one, as soon as you can move yourself reliably, and so actually you need to be able to move yourself. So when you start when you start out, you're just kind of flailing around, so you don't really know. But as soon as you're moving more purposefully, that's when this, the deletion of optical texture is revealed to be reversible, for example, and that reversibility is under your control through your exploration. So as soon as you can do that, that's when you're off to the races. Yeah, prey animals and things and horses and things like that, they have to do it instantly. Yeah. But we also have to do it. We just have the privilege of being able to take our time about it.
Yeah. I wish I'd known more or videoed more at the time. I'm sure I'll get a chance to watch it again. But if you ever do, it's fascinating. It's almost like a condensed version of this calibration that they,
Yeah, and John is pointing out correctly, like the information for detecting object disappearing versus going out of view is in Gibson's point is it's in the information. There's invariant information that's specified. You don't need to infer some complicated mental construct of permanence versus right. It's in the environment, the information optic array.
Yeah. And so basically, as far as we can tell, animals with visual systems come ready to be sensitive to flow and structure, but then they then are active in their particular way, and they tune themselves into the particular flow and invariant structure of their particular environment. But all you need is the ability to be able to be sensitive to flow, effectively, slow and invariant structure. You just then have to learn what it means. But as John points out, you don't pick up the occluding edge and figure out that the object persists. You learn that occlusion specifies going out of view, not out of existence.
Yeah. I think Gibson, what he's trying to do here, right? He's not arguing you don't do these mental processes. Well, he probably would, but I think what he's doing, his main point here is just showing there's a viable alternative to inferring these things. Whether you want to still believe your brain's a computer doing all this process, that's your choice. But that's the argument I get in with a lot of people. It's a viable alternative theory, right?
Yes.
Of how we perceive the world. Yeah.
Yes, and if this is the raw material of perception, then the processes involved in using it are immediately different. Yeah. And then the question is, are those processes still computational or representational? Well, maybe not, but
to assume that we have to compute and do this because the information is not good enough, Gibson showed no, that's not true.
Yeah.
That's not true at all. There's tons of information.
And again, it opens up a theory of perception and action that works for all organisms, which is important.
Which makes you happy.
Yeah, definitely. Where have we got to?
He talked a little bit about the moon and the sun. There are weird cases.
So when he finishes talking about occlusion, then he moves into how is ambient light structured, a theory, right? What are the sources of structure?
Yeah.
And he starts talking about some of those sources of structure. And so actually, a lot of what he talks about actually is like he's talking about, what is it that makes invariant structure? What is it that is revealed by variant structure?
And the moon, that's interesting, because obviously shadows and stuff like that give you another whole load of information, don't they?
Yes.
And the fact that it also tells you about time of day and things, and and other animals are aware of that as well. But he's right, how it changes. So again, invariants are revealed through how much light changes throughout the 24 hours and the way shadows change, and that is one of the sources of picking up invariants.
So we have a moving source of illumination is just one of the facts of our existence. Right? The sun goes across the sky. And so, when the sun's over here, this side of my nose is directly illuminated, but when the sun's over here, this side of my nose is directly illuminated, and that continuously changes over. If I don't move, if I'm just a surface in the light and the environment, then as the moving source of illumination changes, there's regularities in how bits of me are illuminated. That's the other thing he's talking. The other emphasis is on it's illumination of surfaces in environments, not how things are lit up, not sources of light, not how much light is coming off. It's illumination is the key, right? And illumination is not just what happens when light strikes you directly from a light source, but there's light reverberating off all the other surfaces and fills the space around me. And some of the illumination on me comes from those surface reflections, right?
Yeah. I'm always impressed when I read these books, like how much Gibson kind of went into these edge cases. Like if I was writing this book, I would be like, we're not talking about that. Moon and large objects are different. Celestial thing. He gave a lot of thought, and I think it helped him define that.
He's probably thought about it. There's one bit that I didn't understand. Okay. There's one bit that I got quite confused about, and this was his. I mean, I like the cartoon, the vanishing point for Miles. I didn't quite understand what the bit when he's talking about what was it, that they're not the same. I was like, I just need to ask you. I think I might have been tired because it's last paragraph, isn't it? Where the edge, what was it? The puzzle to this thing around vanishing points and horizons.
So he's just spent a long time talking about how occlusion is one of the ways that optical texture can go away.
And the horizon is an occluding edge.
It is.
And I got lost.
But also, it's only sort of an occluding edge, right? So it's an occluding edge for things that are occluded, that it occludes, but it doesn't occlude. It occludes the sun. But only because the sun is sufficiently far away.
And the other side of the Earth, the far side.
It does, but it's doing two things. Remember the difference between the cup that occluded the other far side of the cup versus the cup in front of Rob's face. The horizon does both of those things.
It does both of them,
So it occludes things behind it, like the moon and the sun, and it occludes itself, the curvature of the Earth. But he's pointing out here, he's just working through the fact
that horizon points and vanishing points. Why do two lines?
Well, people used to get very excited about vanishing points because they're a feature of static perspective geometry, right? Mastering the vanishing point and putting it in the right place is one of the ways to successfully learn to convey depth in a 2D image. And the invention of that was a real revolution for painting. What he's doing is he's saying he's just spent a whole bunch of time talking about how occlusion is one of the ways optical texture can go away, and it goes in a particular way that specifies an occlusion event. But there's other ways in which texture can go away. The texture can go away if the object gets very far away, right? But you can tell the difference between something going very far away and something being occluded. So there must be a difference in the way that optical texture goes away. And there's another case as well. Oh, and when things go out of existence, they go out in another way. So basically he's identifying that there's lots of ways in which optical texture can go away. But they're all different from one another because the underlying cause is different. And because the information is different, you can perceive that it was caused by different things.
So that's why the horizon. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't get muddled up then. As much as I thought. I was thinking there's something
Pretty
else
subtle.
extra.
Yeah.
I don't know what the other bit is.
But he's part of it. Once all objects are sufficiently far away, there's a limit to visual angle that we can perceive.
Yeah. And that's different from occlusion.
Yes.
And you can perceive the difference. That's the final bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The start. Oh,
you were talking about the fact that he's going against, he's engaging with all these edge cases. He's engaging with all the edge cases just to head off the obvious arguments, right?
Yeah. And also, it helps clarify the general case.
Absolutely. The edge cases are clearly things he's had to argue with people.
I was going to say there'll be people have set them up as straw men, or they'll have argued with them.
Somebody will have gone, but James, what about this? And he will have gone, all right, screw you. Here's my theory of that, right?
Yeah, good old chapter. I'm so glad we just won. Like I say, it's so important. And like we said right at the beginning, my umbrella takeaway is the important bit, the really big thing that he does here is say, actually, vision is about moving, or vision. We need to look at vision from a locomoting organism.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, right, it's funny. I was just thinking about when you said that, like, it's never occurred to anybody else to treat the moving point of observation as the general case. The moving point of observation has always been the problem case.
Especially, you have to explain. Yep.
And all Gibson's done is has flipped that by going, do you know what? Animals are always in motion.
Mm-hmm.
So much comes from that simple fact of our existence, right? It's wild that no one's thought to do it. Well, no, I take it back. It's not wild because they were all starting in the wrong place. They were all starting with their beautiful mathematical theory of geometry and then trying to figure out what an organism could get out of it. And Gibson's like, well, you can't do the geometry until you figure out what it is you're specifying, right? Mm-hmm. The ambient optic ray, we're finally starting to get to the geometry of information, but you don't do the geometry until you figure out the environment to be perceived. Everyone was doing it in the reverse order, and that's why it never occurred. They were starting with their beautiful maths. Yeah. The maths for a static point of view is easier than the maths for a moving point of view. Mm-hmm. So the maths for a static one first, and then started there. It's funny, isn't it? It's just
completely different, isn't it? I mean, he even says at the beginning, actually, I mean, he's quite explicit. I can't remember but right at the beginning, he talks about the fact that it's only locomoting animals that have visual, like that plants don't have vision in the way we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, of course, it must be about locomoting. That's what it's for.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like you say, everyone else has gone, let's start at the simple bit and then build it out. But that doesn't have any of the information we need.
Yeah, and this is why Rinson's smart perceptual device idea and the polarimeter paper is such a nice idea, because the point of that paper is that simple is relative.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The polarimeter is a device that directly measures area.
Yeah.
And from those measurements, you can derive lengths. So to the planimeter, simple is the higher order variable area, and complicated is the lower order variable length. And so the whole point of that paper is just to demonstrate that just because length is lower order than area, length is the number to the power of 1, area is the number to the power of 2, doesn't mean that
reference. That would be good if you could share the reference. And like I said, it doesn't use length to calculate area, does it? It's not.
It's Rinson 1976 or 1977.
Wilson.
On Rinson, R-E-N-E-S-O-N.
Incredibly smart guy.
Yeah.
Came up with biological motion.
Kinematic specification of dynamics. He's I've described him. He's my favorite perceptual psychophysicist. He's done a ton of
any of his stuff.
So
I would say like tau is the object's size divided by its rate of change of size, but you can perceive tau without ever perceiving an object's size. That's because you don't build it in the brain, right? That's what originally people, when they first tried to connect neuroscience to the stuff, would actually, where's the size detector? Now add that to the right. We like a looming detector we had 4 edges that put together 4 edge detectors that like motion going outward, then you have a looming, like you're building it up, but that's not really what
Yeah.
talking about with direct perception.
There was work done in pigeons, I think, that showed that the threshold for detecting looming is lower than the threshold for detecting the elements of looming. And so, of course, if that's the case, you can't be detecting the elements and then building
it.
Yeah.
Looming first. Yeah.
That's the way, you know, when we talk about
visual. Prey animals pick up moving other objects long before they are close enough in a visual array to pick up any other information about them.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a ton in here. I'll publish the blog post when we're done here.
Yeah.
There's so much in here.
Yeah.
A really important chapter though, isn't it? It's so important.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad
the whole that invariant key, you know, ideas of variance and invariance. And next chapter we're talking about events.
Yeah, so everything today was about the structuring of the optic array primarily by the locomotion of the organism. And events is the structuring of the object array by things changing in the environment. And that's what an event is.
Yeah.
Okay.
It gets a little bit of Einstein in it. I know you kind of dismissing the separation of space and time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And when he's talking about flow, what flow is. In this chapter.
He talks a little bit, well, it's not events, because when he talks about water, it's the first time he talks about moving environment. Although it's a moving environment, isn't it? So this is going to be much about things moving in environments or environments moving.
Yeah. He mostly in chapter 5 he mostly restricts himself to changes due to motion. Just the final bit with the moving source of illumination, then he finally
I started getting quite excited about that, because like when, you know, somebody who see kayaks and paddleboards and things, there's so much, you know, you look at the water and you can see so much of what's happening with wind and tides and things underneath the surface through information.
But the first thing we can see is that it is water rather than
that's what he was talking about. Yeah.
Quite important, really.
Interesting. Yeah. Very different audiences.
Yeah, that's a really lot, and that's important chapters, important ideas, right? This is the building the case for direct perception, right?
Absolutely.
We slowly built. Now we've shown there's information in the environment that's specified. That's
yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks. Yeah. We made it through another chapter. This one's going a lot easier than the last book.
Way less words to look up.
It's building and developing really nicely. Like, it's funny. It's been years since I thought about this and about this book in the order in which it is presented. And it's well worth going through in order, because each bit sits on top of every other bit pretty straightforwardly, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't possibly talking about it would never, like, it would make no sense to talk about visual solid angles if you hadn't already talked about surfaces, for example, right? That doesn't seem like rocket science, but it's a pretty radical move, and it's enabling and it's just enabling lots of maneuvers that are going to come in really handy when we try to make perception actually work for a change.
Yeah, and I also like there's less of here's what the existing theory is and why it's wrong. Right?
Yeah.
Gibson's not taking that route. He's going, here's what the world is.
Gibson does not pay the ecological tax.
No, he doesn't do the usual thing where we have to explain information processing for 5 pages before we right? He just gets right to it. Right? I appreciate that.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I guess in some ways that was nice about reading Turvey first. Turvey's done all that. I wouldn't have wanted to go back to it. Turvey spent a lot of time doing it. Whereas Gibson, it just really focuses on describing the world and the environment we live in detail. He gets into the what is our environment. There was one bit actually we didn't bit that I think I'd highlighted it. He talks about what we perceive or the things in the environment is the furniture.
Yeah. I like that expression.
Talks about it, furniture. Yeah, that's again the thing that structures the light. And without the furniture, the only thing you can do is either stand or sit on the surface of the earth.
Mhm.
But it's the furniture; it's all the stuff in it.
Yeah.
It reminds me of
things,
cycling.
objects,
They
things.
call things on the road furniture, right?
Yeah,
They can tend to collide with. So that's what made me think of.
yeah. So he,
Yeah,
he
again, he's building alternative. That's what I like. I get frustrated. I think I'd be happy. I don't have to. You don't have to agree with me that this is the theory of perception. If you want to believe a different theory, but what I want everybody to agree, I'd be happy is this is a viable alternative and it's
Yes.
radically different.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
combined, that's all I want people to accept, right? Than
Yeah.
any kind of computational approach. It's radically.
And basically, if you don't spot that it's radical, then you haven't understood it yet.
Yeah.
I was gonna say
That's
that's
really
It's a little
people
patronizing.
want to
I
accept.
really don't mean it to be patronizing, but it's
Yeah.
kind of the truth, right?
Yeah.
He's making moves that are, and the contrast with Turvey is really interesting. The moves that Gibson are making are so obviously different in kind from the kind of moves that Turvey was laying out that other people were making, right? So Turvey's book was lectures on perception in general. So he was telling the history of the whole thing, and the kinds of moves that Gibson's allowing himself, one at a time, in order, are completely different from the kinds of maneuvers that anybody else ever allowed themselves, and it's leading him to a radically different place.
Yeah.
He
obviously figured out the state of the art. There's problems with it.
Yeah.
Like from his own work. But he doesn't go into detail about what the problems were. He just I thought about things differently. Here it is.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate. I wish I could do that more, but can't get away with it nowadays.
I was just thinking about that like you were talking about people who want to either disagree or I don't find that so much, or they disagree, but they want to have ands. They're like, but you do this. I think that's really interesting because, like I said, it's not that we're denying that people can actually verbalize or use language, which is a form of representation. It's just that we don't have to use that in order to move around in our environment.
Yes.
And it is so radically different.
Story that language is representational, but that doesn't mean that it is built out of representations.
Exactly. But it doesn't mean that then.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the implication of, well, we didn't need to build perception and action out of representations, so the raw material going into the more complicated things is also different. The raw material for perception is different than what everybody thought it was, and because it's different, it enables different things. And then that means that the raw material for the next round up, things that are bootstrapping off perception action, the raw material for that's actually different than what we thought. I wonder what the implications of that are.
It doesn't mean that we don't believe in language. I mean, I feel like people set up crazy things.
Or even the view that sometimes in perception I'm going to do this. Sometimes I'm going to add in other experiences, predictions, whatever. Well, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, right?
Occlusion's the great case for this, right? So Jeff Bingham used to tell us, like walking in behind a picket fence, right? And so the idea is that, you're seeing my face, and the question is, are you perceiving, representing, perceiving? So if that's the story you want to tell, then you are now on the hook for telling me how you make the switch, why you make the switch, how you know when to make the switch.
Another homunculus in there, then, haven't you? To make that
absolutely, right? Like, so you can tell that story if you want, but that story is actually a very complicated story. Yeah. And Gibson has told you that you are perceiving.
Yeah.
Right? And that's like, again, you want to tell that story, the prediction story, knock yourself out, but it's complicated.
Yeah.
And the switches.
I've always had like another way to direct, indirect, right? Yeah. The problem is, in order to make that work, you need some system, something that's monitoring all the time to know when to switch.
A direct system and indirect system.
It makes the whole system indirect.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So direct,
Absolutely.
when you add indirect perception to direct perception, it makes the whole thing indirect, which
Yes.
is not direct perception anymore. So that's my point.
Yeah. So you either get direct perception or you get indirect perception, but you cannot have both.
both.
And they're just And that's
Get
a nice way to explain it.
No.
Yeah.
But,
It's funny though, because that move of having different systems and then having a system that monitors and does the change is actually baked into lots of cognitive thinking. I was just thinking immediately about working memory, right? Natalie's working memory system has a couple of subsystems and a chief executive, or the executive, what's it called? It is just, central executive. So the idea that you have a system that does one thing and a system that does another thing and an executive that monitors is a very common move in representational cognitive theories. And so it seems like it should be a perfectly plausible move where all you're doing is switching between indirect and direct perception. But you're right, it's only a viable move in indirect theory.
Indirect perception.
The executive has to be an indirect system as well. And that, you're right, that makes the whole thing indirect. So that's a nice way to think about it. Yeah.
I might still very, when I read stuff that's from a representational perspective, like for example, reading some stuff on Think Aloud that is trying to look at underlying, executive constructs. There's no justification about why there might be representation or how it would work. Nothing. Just I still find that a bit frustrating, actually.
We see all the initial motivation and figuring out the reasons. All the figuring out of the reasons was done in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. We've done all that work, Mary, and we just get to rely on it now. But that's the mindset, right? And so,
and then they knew there was an unpayable loan on intelligence or homunculus or whatever you want to call it, the problem of infinite regress. Homunculus, the game of infinite regress. That's Julia Blau, isn't it?
I have a point I've been trying to make it somewhere recent. It's become part of the definition.
Yes.
Like when you define what decision making is, people start with it's a mental process that's part of a mechanism for decision making. That's not decision making, right? You've confounded them.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And all those problems, right? So it's become the idea that all those problems are solved. So the idea is, well, we figured out what representations are and how they work. And now we get to rely on those is premised on the idea that we've actually solved all the problems. And the Turing book was a good reminder. Actually, there's about 4 or 5 really fundamental problems, quite fatal flaws that do not currently actually have solutions. I think about symbol grounding is the big one. How do you ground your representation? When I was an undergrad in the 90s, that was still an active topic of conversation. People were furiously arguing about how the hell you grounded representations. And then the 2000s arrived and everybody was like, well, clearly grounding is solved. And people talking about it. I don't know what happened.
It was.
But like Barcelona tried to bring it back for a little bit and tried to get embodied sort of grounding going and sensory motion things. But honestly, the problem was never solved.
We
simply got talking about it and forgot that we hadn't solved it, that we had just stopped talking. I remember it happening. It was bizarre.
Just came out of fashion.
It just like in the 90s, you couldn't move in a psychology seminar without bumping into a paper about the grounding problem. And in the 2000s, they simply didn't exist anymore.
Motor learning and motor control was the same, but I mean that was why Tovey and Kelsall and everybody was doing the work they were doing on action systems.
Absolutely,
they were trying to solve that problem. They weren't just bringing complexity theory in, which now has been brought. They were trying to solve that problem very explicitly, trying to solve the grounding problem.
It's one of the reasons why politically being an ecological psychologist is complicated, because we're the ones standing on the edge saying the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
And no one likes that guy when the emperor has all the funding money. If you seriously, there's a and being the ones to point out that the emperor has no clothes is a complicated place to be. Until everybody, and eventually the idea is that if you keep saying it consistently, people will eventually go, oh, actually, crap, you're right. but it takes time, right? And that's why it's complicated. But that's the position that we're in. We're in the position of calling out the fact that the emperor has no clothes, that the problems are not yet solved, and that's just a complicated place to stand.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, we got a little added additional editorializing about the challenge of promoting this approach, and
Gibson's feistiness always inspires me.
Yeah. He was definitely he wasn't shy about engaging in an argument.
No, one of my favorite Gibson's quote is, "If I am right, then all of the experiments of other psychologists have been wrong."
Yeah,
like,
a waste of time.
To say it is amazing.
Yeah.
Right. Next chapter in 2 weeks again.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Okay,
that should
we'll
work.
see you next time. And before we start, we'll probably talk for another hour if we're not careful.